another rant. I might sound a bit off. I'm a little bit under the weather, but I still got to shoot, still got to film, and I don't get many opportunities to. So I feel this would be a good time as any. Topic of today: PS3 has no games. This is a common thing you'll see from the gaming community regarding the PS3 because, well, simply put, it wasn't the best of ideas by Sony. Obviously, we're way past that now. The PS5's out and the Xbox Series X. I hate the Xbox naming convention. Like, the first two are fine. Xbox 360. It's like, okay. But they could have gone with like 720, kept with the, going up in number thing. That would make sense. No, they just called it the Xbox One. It's just like, the original Xbox or Xbox One? It's stupid. I'm not really going to get into that. But, that's why I like PlayStation's naming convention. Simple. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just like, people know what it is, makes sense, easy to follow. Every box or packaging looks different, so you can tell what games for what. Obviously, the biggest departure would be, not departure, but the closest ones would be PS4 and PS5, with only a slight change that looks worse for the PS5. The PS5 packaging looks way worse than the PS4 one. But that's mainly because they still have, the blue boxes from the PS4, but then they have, new font. Well, not font, but the coloring is now, instead of, blue and white, it's now white and black, and it looks a bit weird and stuff. I'm not the biggest fan of it. But the reason why people have the argument that PS3 has no games is because of Sony's horrible plan with the PS3. So if you know a little bit about gaming history, you might not have to listen to this, but if you don't, obviously Nintendo was pretty heavy in the game market. They were pretty much well known. Sega was too, but as gaming was getting more graphically intense and things were ramping up, some other companies came out. Now Sony, the reason why they made the PlayStation is they were already in talks with Nintendo and had plans to release a disc-based add-on for the Nintendo 64, if I'm correct. And due to certain things, plans not coming together, they decided to split that deal and just not do it. But Sony took all the work and information that they had done with it and decided to just improve upon it a little bit and come out with the PlayStation. So you had the N64, the Sega Saturn, which was another disc-based console. So it was more in line with competing with PlayStation than it was with Nintendo, although it still was competing with Nintendo in the video game space. And then obviously PCs, but even still, PC gaming wasn't quite where it is today. It was there, but not to the same degree. And guess what? PlayStation 1 sold like crazy. Because it had discs, which were much better storage. It looked better, ran better. It was better in almost every single capacity to the Nintendo 64 and definitely to the Sega Saturn. So people just went with that. And then Nintendo's like, okay, we gotta change things up. We gotta improve. Sega's like, we got one last one in the tank. Our sales suck. And then Microsoft won the end of the game. And so you had probably the largest suite of big name consoles at an E3. And so it was obviously the Sony PlayStation 2, the original Xbox, the Nintendo GameCube, and the Sega Dreamcast. Obviously Dreamcast didn't perform that well, even though it had a neat gimmick, some neat gimmicks and stuff, and Sega was a dying breed. The Nintendo GameCube, well, great, it used discs. It didn't use standard-sized discs, and it couldn't even play standard-sized discs because the disc tray was too small. So that was a huge hindrance to it, because the PlayStation 2, and I believe the original Xbox as well, although the Xbox was kind of finicky with it, could play DVDs. And that makes them a pretty big seller during this time, because DVD players were still relatively expensive. And so if you could knock out two devices in one, great. And because of its size and because of the fact that it was backwards compatible with previous games, PlayStation 2 sold crazy compared to the other consoles. And PlayStation 2 is the highest selling game console of all time, which is insane to think about, but it just was. It worked really well. It got sold to a bunch of hotels and resorts and stuff because the fact that it could play DVDs, well, they could use it as a DVD player, and you could like rent DVDs from the front office and stuff or bring it on to watch. But then also they could have you rent games to play too. So if you have like kids or whatever, so that'd be another thing that they could charge you for. And it was a better investment for them than just a regular DVD player. And so you had those deals, and the console was just popular in general. It was sold for a very long time too. I don't know when they discontinued it, but there's a lot of them out there. And the fact that it was backwards compatible with the PlayStation 1 was a huge selling point, because it means you had this library of games that you already had saved up. And you're like, sweet, I can just play these old games in my new console as well as get the new games that I want. So, it's not as big a deal as upgrading. Nowadays upgrading is a lot bigger concern because you don't have that option, right? You don't have that backwards compatibility. I mean, Xbox, I think, has it to a certain degree, but I'm not entirely sure. PC, yeah, you're good. For the most part, it depends. It depends on the game, depends on the operating system it's designed for, because like a Windows Vista game, won't run on a Windows 10 computer, right? At least I don't think it will. And so like stuff like that kind of doesn't work, but But if you have a strong enough computer, you might be able to emulate the old operating system or have it on a separate drive and boot it that way. So no big deal there. But that's one of the biggest things for me is backwards compatibility. It's misused so much nowadays. Like when people say backwards compatibility nowadays, they mean digital re-release. And like, that's not what that means at all. Backwards compatibility means I can use the old hardware on the new system and it'd be fine. Like I can use my hard copy, my disc, this thing, from my previous console, put it in the new one and it works. Right? That's what it means. That's backwards compatibility. But people have warped that definition into meaning, oh, are the old games available for purchase on the new console, at least digitally? And that's not backwards compatibility. That's a digital re-release, okay? And that defeats the purpose of playing those old games. The reason why you have backwards compatibility is so you save money. But by just having digital re-releases, you're doing the exact opposite. You're spending money on the games that you already own, okay? Which is stupid. Especially if you still have the old hardware to play it. Now, if you don't, I understand that, but then why do you still have the games if you have no hardware to play it? Might as well get rid of the games too. No. But that was the thing with the PS3. PS3, because Sony was so dominant in the market space, because PlayStation 1 was a huge hit, PlayStation 2 was the hugest hit in gaming history, they were a bit cocky going into the PlayStation 3. And so when the PlayStation 3 came about, they decided to give it all these features, all these things. It was super bulky. It had like 17 different ports for different media storage and data information and all this other crap. It was backwards. Some of the models were backwards compatible with PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 1 games. Later PS3s were still compatible with PlayStation 1 games, but not PlayStation 2, which sucks. But like PS3 was meant to be like the ultimate PlayStation at that point. But Sony did something very dumb, and they made programming for the device way too complex. And their thinking was, if it's so complex to code for our system, and we hold such a large market share in the gaming world, then developers will only want to develop for our system, and they're not going to bother developing with the others. Which is a dumb way of thinking, but that's what it was. So the PS3 came out, ridiculously expensive. I can't remember what it was retailing at, like $600 or $700, which is just like Jesus. And it had all these features that people weren't going to use, or the average person wasn't going to use. Only some of the models were backwards compatible fully, and yeah, it was a big problem for Sony. You know, the Xbox 360 was just kicking the shit out of them. Even though one thing I will give PS3 over Xbox 360 is online multiplayer still being free. That's something that pisses me off to this day, is online multiplayer, you have to pay for it. I hate that. I hate it so much. Because it's stupid, right? And they try to make it a little bit better by saying, well, you get these free games every month. Well, they're not free. I'm paying for them. And who says I want those games, right? Sure, I'm paying only, what, $5 a month, $6 a month. And, you know, I can play online stuff, and I get free games to download and play. And sometimes they're big, you know, titles and things, which is cool. But at the same time, back in the day, I used to just be able to play online for free, and I loved it. And you still can with PC, and, you know, PC players would be like, oh, well, you can just do that on ours. The thing is, I don't have a good computer. My computer's decent, and I can play a good chunk of games. But, one, they're all going to be on the minimum graphical setting. I knew one friend who, their computer was not the greatest, and so what they physically had to do was go into the coding, I think, of Overwatch. They had to go in the coding of Overwatch and lower the graphics even more than the settings allowed. They had to change the graphical limits within the code itself to make the game actually playable on the computer, because it was too much for the processor to handle. And that just, to me, was hilarious. But yeah, my computer is not the best. It works, and it does what I need it to do, but yeah, I can't play a lot of the fancier games. I mean, heck, I'll have Valorant, and I don't even like Valorant, and Overwatch on, like, minimal graphical setting, and for the first, like, couple minutes of a match, I am fucking blind. Like, I'm not blind, my frame rate drops so tremendously, I could be moving like a bunch, and I just don't see it. I just see what I'm looking at in that 1 or 2 frames, and I'll get like 3 frames a second, and it's awful. Because it's just having a hard time loading everything in. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why I stopped playing Valorant. I'll still play Overwatch from time to time, because my computer, for some reason, handles it better. Even though, again, I lower everything to minimum settings, it still is just, like, not the best. But with the PS3, right, because Sony made it so complex, developers actually stayed away from it. And because it was so expensive, they knew consumers aren't going to buy it, so they stayed away from it. And they went to the 360. And so a good chunk of games that were not first-party games through Sony, but a good chunk of games that were third-party, they would go to Xbox first, and then they get put to the PlayStation 3. Right, and typically once they got to the PlayStation 3, they were worse in graphical and audio quality. They might have some features stripped. Well, actually, that's not true. Sometimes they would add additional things because they knew the PlayStation would get a later release. And so to incentivize it, you still buy it on PlayStation 3, is they'll give you bonus content, right? Which is like, it's nice, but, I mean, come on. And then what else? But yeah, that was the main thing. So when people say PS3 has no games, all the games that they have are worse than the Xbox releases. And not to mention, some games just never came to PlayStation 3 because the developers only focused on Xbox. And because Xbox held a decent market share at the time, it didn't really matter. Now, at the end of their lifespans, their sales were about equivalent. Heck, the PS3 might have sold even more, if I remember correctly. But that was mainly due to the advent of the PS3 Slim and the PS3 Super Slim. You know, the smaller models that removed the PlayStation 2 backwards compatibility, removed a bunch of excess ports, I think increased their storage, just overall made the console a better experience. So yeah, all for a reduced cost, which was great. Now, what really bugs me is about consoles today. Consoles today, when you put in a disc, the disc no longer acts as like, how do I say? the disc no longer is what the console is reading to play the game. You know, back in the day, the console would be reading the disc to play the game. And then if you wanted to save anything, you would usually save to a little card. You'd save to a storage card that you put in the device. And so you could go to anybody's house with anybody's PlayStation, you know, oh, you have that game? Well, I have my save card. I can plug in my save card and play my save. Nowadays, it doesn't read the disc for the game. The disc acts as like a security key, where you load in that disc, and it's like, oh, you own this game? Cool. Well, the game is downloaded on your console, and so is the save data. It's connected with your account, so anytime you want to play on anybody else's machine, you have to log in with your account, and then you can play from there. And it's just like, it's nice that I don't have to carry around a physical copy to play at somebody else's house, but it's way faster and more convenient to have to just plug in a save card and go, right? Do I have to type in my entire email and my username and hope I sign in if I get it correctly? Sucks. Not to mention the fact that every single controller while you're playing has to be synced to a profile, either a user on that PlayStation or an actual account. So stupid. It is so stupid. I hate it. I get why it would make sense for games like, say, Injustice or Mortal Kombat, where you're going to have different loadouts, and those loadouts are tied to your account, and so you need to be able to have your account associated with your controller, or you need to have your account associated with something, that way you can play with your custom things. I get it in that sense, but it's just so dumb. It's smart and dumb at the same time, and it's really frustrating. Because say you want to play with 4 people, but you know, you're one person, you only have 1, maybe 2 accounts on your PlayStation. And then, you know, your friends come over and you play with 4 people. Well, now you got to make 2 random users so they can play. Or they might want to log in on their own shit, and so that takes extra time. Versus back in the day, you would hand them a controller, they would hit the sync button, and they're good to go. You know? But, you know, that's just how shit happens. It's frustrating, but it's the way we live in. Yeah, I think modern consoles, they have the benefits and stuff, but the fact that the game is stored on the console and not right off the disc, it's a bit frustrating, because now you have to have consoles that have extraordinarily large storage. Like my PlayStation 4 Slim has 1 terabyte of storage, which is great. That can cover most of what I want to play, especially when I don't play these like Trinity games like COD or whatever. Or I think, does Activision own fully? I don't know. But I don't play any of those big games that have random large updates. I play a lot of smaller games. I do play some big games like Assassin's Creed or whatever, but I typically don't play the larger games. But yeah, it's just, yeah, whatever. I think I've been 18 minutes at this point. I think that's plenty long. That's long as some videos, shorter than others. So